Hi, everyone. I see that people are still joining the webinar. We'll give it another minute or so for more people to log in, and then we'll get started. All right, I think we can kick things off now. Hello, everyone. I'm David Baker, Chief Security Officer with Bugcrowd. With me today is Johnathan Hunt. He's the VP of Information Security at Invision, and we're going to talk about demystifying program management and crowdsourced security. A lot goes into how you manage and properly incentivize researchers as you go through a bug bounty program. So a lot to talk about today. I want to kick it off by having Johnathan talk about himself a little bit and what he does at Invision.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. As David mentioned, I am Johnathan Hunt, VP of InfoSec for Invision. Fortunately, Invision is one of those organizations that wants to spend money on the security function that it returns value to customers. So the security organization at Invision is rather large. We've got 3 teams currently. The company itself is about 750 people, and the security team, the 3 teams combined, is about 18 people. I joined Invision in 2015. Sorry about that. And when I joined the company, we were 50 people. I've been part of the meteoric rise here at Invision. We've gone from 50 to 750 in about 3 years. And a recent, we've gone from about roughly 6 million ARR to about 100 million ARR in that time frame as well. So it's a little bit about me. Back to you, David.
Great. Sounds like you have executive staff in the meeting room with you there. It's great. Yeah, so I'm Chief Security Officer of Bugcrowd. As I mentioned, I also run operations here. Actually, before Bugcrowd, I was the Chief Security Officer at Okta, where I built the security team there. I was actually a customer of Bugcrowd as well. And before that, I actually ran professional services at a security research and pen testing firm out of Seattle. So on the agenda today, we are going to talk about crowdsourced security, what that really means in the backdrop of a bug bounty program, vulnerability disclosure program, and sort of next-gen pen tests. Along with actually running those types of programs correctly comes the idea of, can I manage it or can I self-manage it? And so the benefits of managing are goes without saying. And so we'll get into really why those benefits are the way they are and how you can realize proper return on your investments when you actually do a properly managed program. Johnathan will then really talk about sort of the backdrop. He has run unmanaged programs where literally it's his team doing all the management piece, and then he's also run with the backdrop of actually having the platform such as Bugcrowd run it instead. And he has a really good narrative on the ROIs and the benefits of doing the program management with the platform. And then to finish it off, we'll talk about some things that we're looking ahead with in the future developments with Bugcrowd, and as well as taking your question and answering those as well. So as we introduce the idea of crowdsourced security, let's talk about obviously, the typical cybersecurity struggles, and whether it's crowdsourced security, whether it's artificial intelligence or machine learning. Like there's a lot of firms, if you will, or companies in the security space that are really trying to really tackle these four things. Really, is everyone has in a growing attack surface. I have internal applications that I'm actually moving into the cloud. Then I'm taking my virtualization, I'm containerizing my virtualization, and then I'm I have a skill shortage. Like, how do I have not only a security team, but then a sec DevOps team, and so on and so forth. I mean, like Johnathan is one of the few leaders in the Valley that actually have really a well thought out and well planned security team with like 3 different distinct teams that work well together. But as you take this idea of moving stuff from on premises into the cloud, you're taking stuff that has really bad architecture in the first place and trying to fix it as you move into the cloud. So sometimes you have not only a growing attack surface, but the security architecture is flawed to begin with. And then on top of that, dynamic motivated adversaries keep growing day in and day out. And so this from a backdrop of where the security industry is and where people are trying to tackle it from. And so with that backdrop is, the idea of let's leverage crowdsourced security. And why is crowdsourced security a better approach? If you think about the idea of harnessing the global community of white hat hackers and really taking the approach of a really good defense is the best offense, right? The idea of people looking at your web application, testing your web application, finding vulnerabilities or bugs in your web application have been around for a while, right? And in sort of the dark ages of early 2000s and whatnot, the idea of what constitutes responsible disclosure, and hey, I have found a bug on your website, I want to talk about it at DEF CON, so on and so forth. But the idea of actually running a bug bounty program goes all the way back to Netscape, where they actually realized that getting the community of developers and getting the community of global developers giving feedback and commenting on security bugs and providing those feedback of bugs into the development team was really started at that point. And so fast forward to today, and there are actually several different platforms that offer the idea of taking and engaging global researchers, adding on a layer of triage and validation so that you, the client, get the actual signal rather than a lot of noise. If you can imagine thousands of researchers testing your application and they all submit a bunch of bugs at once, there's a lot of work to be done to making sure those are all valid and in scope and not duplicated, so on and so forth. The idea that you, the customer, then get to review and accept those vulnerabilities and then reward the researchers for those vulnerabilities and then go ahead and fix and verify and so on and so forth. Getting from 1 to 4 in this crowdsourced security can take a lot of work, and that's where the idea of talking about the management piece and the ROI that you can get from the management piece. We know that from a crowdsourced security, we're going to be able to deliver far more scale, far more value by leveraging a much, much larger population, more eyes, the more bugs being found. But to be able to get from this engagement in the first place to actually fixing your vulnerability and verifying them can actually take quite a few steps, and that's where the value of managing your program come into play. And today, there's typically, if you go to the different vendors, there's sort of typically 3 different flavors of crowdsourced securities, and most common, and a lot of companies just have this attached to their application is a vulnerability disclosure, where it's like if you see something and say something, we may recognize you as a top researcher on our page, but hey, we'll give you some swag or just the ability to report in a vulnerability to an application. It's obviously something that NIST is requiring for all government entities as well. You step up into a reward cost structure, you then get into the bug bounty realm of crowdsourced security. We're actually defining here's the scope. You, the researchers, can take that scope, test, and based upon the value and criticality of what you submit, I will then provide you money. And that's the idea of a bug bounty programs. And the idea is you can actually run those whether in private or in public mode. Very famous public types of bug bounty programs can be seen with Netgear, in Motorola, and so on and so forth. And in large companies who have a very mature program often take a private bug bounty program into a public bug bounty program because they can get a lot more eyes from the public perception. And then the idea of a next-gen pen test. So we do have boutique firms all over the world that are providing on-site consultants type of pen testing. The idea of taking the crowd and providing a pen test whereby which you get a pen test report, you get a coverage analysis of all the pieces that they tested, you get retesting and so on and so forth. We're able to deliver that. And the idea is now you're paying for results still rather than paying consultants for their time. So the idea of harnessing the crowdsourced security in that manner is actually very, very valuable. And the idea is that you can get rapid risk reduction, rapid time to test. It's more cost effective because you're paying for results rather than for the time. And you get very, very low operational overhead, right? Particularly if you have the platform such as Bugcrowd doing the management for you. That is abstracting and actually managing the program, talking and interfacing with the researchers, paying the researchers, and so on and so forth. It becomes very, very little overhead for you, the customer. Now, the idea of managed versus of self-managed, or what we sometimes call unmanaged, where the customer does the idea of customer running the pounding itself. There is a lot to be done, right? You can engage the crowd. You can then get a bunch of bugs from the crowd. What do you do with those bugs? After a while, how do you continue to keep researchers interested in your program? Once you have things fixed, how do you verify that those fixes continually to be, something publicly facing are appropriate fixes? And there's a lot of steps when you go in through, building a bug bounty program. First of all, you have to define the scope. You have to define where you want the researchers and sort of the guardrails you want them to adhere to. You need to be able to work with security owners inside your organization, but you need to have an abstraction to how do you communicate directly with researchers? How do those security owners go ahead and interact with the researchers? And that's where a managed platform often helps, because the managed platform brings the researchers to you, the security owners. Whereas if you're running the program yourself, how do they submit the bugs? Through email. How do you validate that those bugs are real? What if there is a dispute on the criticality? Researcher thinks it's a critical, you think it's only a medium severity. How do you arbitrate those types of discussions? More often, what we find is after initial program setup, you have a bunch of researchers that are engaged. They find a lot of low-hanging fruit. They find some criticals. And once those are fixed, it gets harder to actually find bugs within the application. And that's how it should, right? You have engagement from researchers, they find bugs, you fix those bugs. It should be harder to find further vulnerabilities. That's when you have to actually pull the levers. Is there new researchers to invite? Is there different skill sets to bring on? Is there more rewards that have to be added, and higher reward ranges, if you will, to incentivize researchers? When do you pull those levers? What typically is the feedback loop of a normal bug bounty program when you need to actually pull those levers? And where do you start? Like, is there a default price for different types of vulnerabilities? What should those default prices be? And those are the things that, as handling hundreds and hundreds of managed programs, Bugcrowd in our operations team does day in and day out. And so that is the value, really, of being able to leverage the expertise of managing across hundreds of different programs and becoming effectively an extension of your security team. Okay. So typical program ROI, right? If you take, and this is actually numbers that are typical for a private program that is now sort of matured and is ready to go public, where you will see upwards of 300 researchers invited to a program. Typically, some researchers who are invited may only spend 1 or 2 minutes and decide it's not really the type of application that they're interested in. But across that, you'll typically get around 18 to 20 hours of effort put into it across the year from researchers. That really equates to 4,000 hours of total testing time. Well, that's actually 2 full-time penetration testers that you would have on staff normally. So that sort of that cost of what it would take and the output of what you would get from 2 full-time actual pen testers having on staff, right? And if you look at the cost of that, 2 full-time heads, typically that's a $200,000 fully burdened cost of an actual pen tester who sits on staff doing pen testing day in and day out. If you look at the numbers there, the price for in-house testing, if you can get them at $100 an hour, outsourced to India at $60 an hour, you can actually outsource to a boutique firm at $220 an hour. It really comes out to be about $25 an hour if you think about the cost of managing the program as a small expense, and then the cost of the actual bounty pool paid out. So these are actually some typical numbers that our customers see. And if you think about $25 an hour, that comes in at way less than 2 full-time heads at $200,000 a year. So your ROI is really about 5x at this point. Now with that, I want to hand it over to Johnathan to really talk about how he's made the transition from self-managed to a managed program, and all of the sort of return on his investment and value that he's received by leveraging Bugcrowd.
Hey everyone. So the good news is my executive assistant is otherwise preoccupied. So I am fully focused and fully attentive here. I want to give a little bit of context first and talk briefly about Invision to give you an idea about what the company is and what we do. If you've not heard of us, Invision is one of the world's most powerful and only fully end-to-end digital screen and product design tool. We're currently used in 82 of the Fortune 100s and 60% of the Global 2000. Invision has over 4 million users currently, and we recently closed the Series E, which valued us at $2 billion. Now, in terms of bug bounty, we have used a bug bounty program for 4 years, the last 2 being with Bugcrowd. And some of you here may have heard my story before. I was initially anti-bug bounty, build the sign, pick it outside the office, that whole thing. I mean, I was suspicious of bug bounty. I didn't like the idea of being exposed to these unknown hackers. I didn't like the idea of what the potential impact to the environment and our customer data could be, let alone, the other sort of administrative side with costs associated and not having the time, the resources to manage the program. But after realizing a few sort of like core fundamental ideas about the way companies are breached, the way they're attacked, the way they're exposed on the internet, you come to realize that you don't have to have a bug bounty program to be attacked, right? Like, it's not because of the bug bounty program you risk being breached. It's not because of a bug bounty program someone is going to find out about your organization on the internet and start to, try to hack away at your web application, your services, your sites, whatever, right? So it's going to happen anyways. And with that in mind, the benefits of a bug bounty program, which includes, researcher expertise, the volume of researchers willing to test your environment, the ability to find these critical vulnerabilities, the ability to do something that your scanners and your static analysis scans won't find, building that relationship with the community, and there's a ton of more. And there's a ton more advantages to running the bug bounty program, you quickly realize the value it's going to have for your organization. And of course, so then we dove in with a unmanaged program initially with a limited scope to try to get our bearings straight and figure out, like, is this right for us? How's this going to, how are we going to manage this? How's this going to work? We did that for 2 years, and in the last 2 years, we went Bugcrowd's managed program. We'll talk a little more about that in a second, and the results are fairly dramatic. So let's go to the next slide. So, like many of you here, Invision was doing all the right things. We had the internal and external scans. We were doing code analysis. We did our third-party pen test. We did, we were patching every 30 days. We had our patch, SLAs in place. We, criticals were done in 3 days, and highs in 30, and mediums, and so on and so forth. We had a WAF. We had DDoS protection. And what we found is that I personally, as head of the program, was still not confident of vulnerability management within our organization. I was still finding that we would be notified of vulnerabilities, maybe from customers, right? Which is the last place you want to be notified of vulnerabilities. I assure you that. You don't want a customer coming to you telling you, we found this vulnerability in your product, right? I mean, like, you want to know this, you want to be ahead of this. Being notified of that, being notified of your standard vulnerability notifications from like US CERT or some of the other feeds, RSS feeds that you may subscribe to, and seeing that, hey, why are we not catching this stuff? And I'll tell you why. What we were doing wasn't good enough. There's two very sort of like complex ways to find vulnerabilities that vulnerability scanners can't find, or source code analysis can't find. One of those is chaining attacks, right? You don't typically, you can use your Kali Linux and your Burp Suite and your NetSparker and that type of thing, but you can use your pen testing tools, but they're still relatively poor at chaining attacks because they don't have this human intelligence, right? They don't have the ability to view the landscape and the scope and run additional scans and identify additional ports and services open and learn how to do that, right? So the chaining of attacks is typically not a strong suit of vulnerability scanners or pen testers, or I'm sorry, that just having it the once a year pen testing done. The other thing is somewhat very related to that is pivoting, right? Once the network is compromised, once they identify the path, then maybe they use Metasploit or whatever and crack a shell into an edge server, a web application server on the edge of your network. Then it's a matter of pivoting, right? Can they pivot to other environments? Can they pivot to other instances? Can they pivot to other customer clouds? Can they, like, what does that look like? And again, that's something that that tooling won't typically do. Once we put bug bounty into place, once we put more particularly, by the way, once we put Bugcrowd into place, these are some of the results that we found. We were finding 2 times more vulnerabilities per month. What we were finding before from our internal AppSec team, which, by the way, has an exhaustive list of responsibilities, as I'm sure your AppSec teams have, right? It's not just a red team pen testing all day long, 8 hours a day, resolving vulnerabilities, right? Our AppSec team, again, the company Invision's about 750 people. Our AppSec team is about 5 people. DevSecOps is about 5 people, and compliance, risk, and audit's about 5 people. So that team is in charge of risk management. They're in charge of architectural reviews. They're in charge of performing third-party reviews of, say, third-party integrations or custom APIs or something like that. So it's really holistically the application landscape. It's not just looking at the Invision service, pen testing the service, looking for vulnerabilities, solving those vulnerabilities, right? So their time is limited, their ability is limited, and Bugcrowd in particular, we did this managed service with them, managed program with them. They had a ton of researchers start hitting our environment literally within 24 hours. We had a number of findings that we otherwise probably would not have found, or may not have found, over a period of time. It may have taken us an additional 2 weeks to find that. It may have taken us an additional month to find that. We also found 4 P1s. These P1s were significant, and it wasn't necessarily P1s with the Invision service. It wasn't necessarily like, wow, I just compromised your database. These P1s were actually somewhat related to some of these points further down in the slide. It was through like a third-party integration. How they could compromise the third-party integration, which transmitted data to and from us, and they're able to write that TLS connection over, and we're able to, maybe attack our Salesforce database or our MongoDB service or something like that, right? Another one was a P1 with AWS. It was like an account takeover vulnerability within the Amazon environment. Now, some of you might say, well, that's not really in scope, right? That's not really a problem with your service. That's true, but it doesn't make a breach any less damaging, right? I mean, I think you would all agree with that, right? I think it's fair to say that we would like to know if someone can compromise Amazon's root account through whatever, an exposed token or something, or whatever the issue is, right? Maybe it's like a DNS takeover or something, like they did with I don't know if you guys remember I think it was the Wall Street. It was the New York Times, I think, had their domain taken over, hijacked, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago or something, over a DNS exploit. So things like that, right? So the P1s were substantial, potentially saved us from a breach, right? We also found out by doing the managed program with Bugcrowd that we reduced our OpEx by about $280,000. And I want to put in here, because you may be a little skeptical, but I do want to add that was after factoring in program costs. It wasn't just saying, oh, we could reduce 2 FTEs, so that saved us $280,000, but our Bugcrowd costs are $280,000, right? So you're like, well, that's just a wash. That's not true. So this number is after factoring in program cost. It saved us a significant amount of money year over year. So that's an important number, especially if you guys are tight to a budget, right? If there's your finance comes in, they're like, this is your operating cost for the year. That saved us a lot of money. It helped us out a lot. Helped us, prevented us from having to hire additional headcount simply to manage vulnerability management. Invision is a fully web-based SaaS application. So the utmost priority for me, for the organization, is web application security, right? I mean, that is what our product is holistically, end to end. That's all we are, right? So some additional benefits: coverage of third-party integrations. Some of you guys may or may not have that in your program. You may or may not think of that in your program. We particularly thought of it, but simply just did not have time. We are very cloud dependent. Many organizations are, unless you're with a fairly probably sizable Fortune 500 company that owns multiple data centers, that is still somewhat resistant to move to the cloud, which is going to happen, by the way, in some matter of time. It's unavoidable. But we, in particular, are extremely dependent on SaaS applications. We have over 100 partnerships with third-party products, integrations, services, and not to frighten you. That's not all like we transmit customer data to these 100 people. Some of that is like HR apps, right? Some of that is like recruiting apps, and we use stuff for benefits, and we use stuff for, so there's a ton of stuff, right? Dropbox Paper, and we use Zoom, and we use all these Slack for internal communication. So most of those are business apps. Obviously, some of those are tied to the production environment and the delivery of our service. So my team of 5 simply did not have the time to do what all of their other responsibilities, in addition to vulnerability management, in addition to pen testing, in addition to third-party reviews, in addition to audits, in addition to third-party integrations, right? Or continuous reviews of third-party integrations. So if you're like us, what we typically do with third parties is we do a review at the onset of the third party, right? We will do questionnaires, we'll do due diligence, we'll ask for SOC reports, we'll ask for pen testing, we'll have those discussions up front. And then once they're integrated and security has approved them and they are part of the organization, it's difficult to go back and redo that time and time again, especially stay on top of the product 24/7 to identify if they're vulnerable to critical vulnerabilities. Obviously, the last point I think hits home, is fairly relevant. We've dramatically improved metrics. Obviously, time to detect. With Bugcrowd researchers, they identify vulnerabilities well before our team can identify the large amount of vulnerabilities that we get through the bug bounty program. We resolve vulnerabilities faster because we detect them faster, and when their exposure is shortened because obviously the previous two, add to that. Yeah, so let's move to the next slide. So what's interesting is I think it's fair to all of you on this call to sort of understand a managed program versus an unmanaged program. And I've done both, and I've done both multiple times at multiple companies. And what I can say is that for us, it made sense to do a managed program. I'm gonna give you some pros and cons and kind of talk about the differences here in a second. But what I'll tell you is that Invision initially started off with the unmanaged program, and some of my some of my fears were realized pretty early on, and we actually stuck with that program for about 2 years. But we had some significant challenges, right? And again, going back 4 years ago now, my AppSec team was either 1 or 2 people. So I had 1 or 2 people trying to do all of this. And again, the company was smaller, but it doesn't mean that we were doing less work. It didn't mean that we had less third-party services, and it didn't mean that we had substantially less customers. At that time, I think we had 2 million customers. So you can still imagine that there was a large array of responsibilities for this small group to handle. So bringing in an unmanaged program immediately, what that looks like is you use a program or a bug bounty program as the sort of like the hosting provider only. They give you the shell, you do everything else. I mean, you manage the submissions, you have to search for duplicates, you have to identify whether it's in scope, you have to validate the results, then you have to communicate with a researcher throughout the process. You have to ask the researcher to validate a fix afterwards. You have to do internal triaging, right? You have to import it into Jira or whatever ticketing system you're using, identify resources, try to deal with that. Then you have to look at severity. You have to do the rewards. You have to do the reward pools. You have to keep updating your profile and updating your scopes and making changes to the program. And it's all of that. Now, for some companies, they may have the team to do that, and they may have the resources to do that. What I can tell you is that we did not. I've worked at larger companies before, and I can also tell you that no matter the size of your team, no matter the size of your company, it's always a challenge to add an additional task on your team, an additional tool on your team that now requires a significant amount of effort, right? Like, I mean, this is something that I had to specifically hire an additional FTE for to manage, and we are not the size of a Fortune 500 company, right? So you can imagine that based on landscape, we're getting less submissions than you name it, whatever, a Microsoft, an Amazon, a Google, a Facebook, or whatever, right? That could be getting 50 extra submissions we're getting. So we would have to hire 1. They may have to hire 50 people, right, just to manage an unmanaged program. We had some of the additional challenges we had was, and then again, this is my experience, is that we didn't feel like we had support. We had difficulty communicating with that platform's support team. We had difficult getting responses in a reasonable time frame. We didn't feel connected to the community at all. And then lastly, the big one, by the way, was disclosure. We actually had 2 incidents where a researcher publicly disclosed vulnerabilities they found within our platform actually before we fixed it, prior to fixing it. So that was obviously of heightened concern with Invision. So that's some of the challenges that we had with the unmanaged program. Switching over to the managed program now, what Bugcrowd does for us is they handle the validation, they handle all the communication. They actually have integrations into Jira. They will handle the triaging of events on the Bugcrowd platform that automatically imports into Jira. They have the API, the API configuration set up so we can, it imports into Jira. It opens a ticket for us. It fills, auto fills, all the fields that we need that's necessary. And then my AppSec team simply takes the ticket. They look at the ticket. Maybe they can resolve it. Maybe they can then assign it and manage it internally with our engineering groups. They handle the rewards. They handle, we have weekly meetings with them. We're constantly talking about the service. We feel very connected with Bugcrowd, something that we had not experienced before, something I personally had not experienced before at other organizations as well. It's the amount of the amount of attention, I think, the amount of focus and attention that Bugcrowd gives each of their customers is like nothing I've experienced before. And I know this is a bit of a plug for Bugcrowd, right? And I know that, you may or may not think I have a bit of a biased opinion, but what I can tell you is I've used other programs, and the amount of support that you get from them is much different than the support I've gotten from even other vendors, right? I'm talking about like my WAF vendor and my antivirus vendor and my container security tool vendor, and it's really a different ballgame. So the benefits here is between the managed and the unmanaged program is that with a managed program, all that my engineers have to worry about is fixing vulnerabilities. I mean, imagine what your AppSec engineers are being paid annually, per hour, whatever works for you. And then imagine them spending half that time simply logging into a console, looking for duplicate tickets, triaging tickets, communicating with people. I can't get this. I can't replicate this. What did you do to, what did you do to find this vulnerability? I mean, imagine that sort of back and forth before they finally finalize that. Okay, this is a valid submission. Okay, now I can go work it. Right. I mean, and think if that takes even 30 minutes a ticket, or even an hour a ticket, and you have 140 submissions, I mean, that's an FTE for a month right there, doing nothing but managing your console. With Bugcrowd, they do all this for us. My AppSec team simply fixes what they do best. They are able to spend their time and attention and expertise to fix vulnerabilities versus paying them to triage all this stuff, communicate, handle rewards, and everything else. So that's a little bit about my story. That's a little bit about my experience. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back over to David.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was awesome. Thank you so much for that. So we're at last couple of slides here and ready to wrap up. So I want to talk about sort of recapping, the Bugcrowd's managed services and really the benefits you can get from that. So thank you very much for the shout out, Jonathan, about how well we do customer service. That is my team, and so I want to make sure my team is operating on all cylinders. But really, our validation team has a response time of less than 4 hours for critical issues, and in the past 5 months, it's really been 20 minutes for critical issues getting validated and getting in front of customers' eyes. So our acceptance rate post triage to submission resolution is 92%. So that means that's really about the accuracy of the details that we provide to you, the customer, right? So as a researcher submits something, our triage team will go ahead and validate that, and then provide that to you, the customer, and that accuracy and effectively the customer accepting those triages at 92%, which speaks well to not only my team of ASEs, but it also speaks to how we actually process submissions in the context of our VRT. So one of the things we have as part of the platform is a taxonomy of vulnerabilities, right? If you think about an OWASP top 10, OWASP top 10 is a taxonomy of 10 different types of vulnerabilities. We've broken that down into over 800 different types of vulnerabilities. And so a researcher can actually submit and have the granularity to classify their submission into really 800 different types of submissions. And that actually leads that that accuracy rate to be better than 92%. Our signal to noise ratio is 95%. That's really about all of the noise you get, the duplicates, the out-of-scopes, the so on and so forth. We'll go ahead and triage that. And so when it hits customers' desks, that is true vulnerability. That is not noise at all. So oftentimes what drives that 5% that could be improved is actually more clarity and more transparency that we can build into customer bounty briefs. Sometimes there's a need to be more accurate. Sometimes you actually want to have a very broad, very open scope to drive a lot of incentive behavior. So, and lastly, our payouts are number one, right? So 80% of all of our valid vulnerabilities are rewarded within 1 minute of acceptance, right? And so our researchers are paid every Wednesday. And so that means our researchers are basically being paid on a weekly basis, right? They're waiting a full week from when they submit to and it gets accepted by the customer to when they get paid. And that's very, very important because if you think about it, if I'm a researcher and I have to wait 3 months or 45 days to get paid, that's not a whole lot of incentivization. Like I want to be able to use my time because, right, I'm sacrificing my time. I find something valuable for you, the customer, and me getting paid within 1 week is a very, very good experience. And that keeps a very loyal set of researchers within our crowd. All right. And then lastly, looking forward. So, leveraging a bug bounty program and making that part of your security program is becoming commonplace. So, it's not just all over the Silicon Valley do we see folks do this. We see it all across any technology hub. We're seeing and this getting picked up even in the Midwest, where companies are leveraging crowdsourced security to really enhance their security program by really building in that best defense is a very good offense. One of the things that we're moving into, and we'll be offering this, is sort of the next gen pen test ideas, where we will be able to go and help customers through crowdsourced security replace their existing external types of pen tests, where we can provide coverage reporting, we can provide pen test reporting, we can actually provide methodology coverage so that we can assure that the pen tests or the actual crowdsourced tests that we provide are acceptable for PCI, for NIST, and so on and so forth. And so, in short, leveraging the crowdsourced security, particularly through Bugcrowd, is a really, really efficient and really good way to scale your security program, as well as multiplying the staff on your team. All right, and with that, I want to open it up to questions. First question being to Invision, and I'll repeat the question here. How long before you started seeing results, and how long did how did you communicate those results to your stakeholders? So I think that's to you, Johnathan.
Excellent. So I would say we started seeing results. I'm assuming you mean the managed program. Again, we did the managed program first. It was the results did not come quickly, right? It took us. I mean, we were caught off guard, got a bunch of submissions. Really difficult to manage that internally. With the managed program, we were definitely able to see results probably within the first 72 hours. Again, within the first 24 hours, we received probably 30 submissions, right? It's a new program. Everyone's excited to take a crack at it. Got a bunch of submissions, and Bugcrowd, I mean, they're 24/7. I mean, they operate like they're validating. I mean, they're right off the bat taking them, validating them, looking for duplicates, triaging, and we got valid submissions definitely within 24 to 48 hours, I would say. And some higher, some of the better submissions probably came within the first week in terms of like, P1, P2. Well, probably P2, right? We only had a few P1s. And how do we communicate that with stakeholders? Real quick, I'll say that what I was able to do is then provide the executive team, which obviously I'm a member of, provide them sort of like an updated dashboard and report during our, we have a weekly team meetings. I'm able to kind of provide updates to the security program, touch on Bugcrowd or touch on bug bounty. It indicated the number of vulnerabilities we were identifying before and after. Also identified the reduction in time to identify these vulnerabilities, the impact it's going to have, remediating these vulnerabilities ahead, within a certain period of time. Basically, the window of exposure is what they were also interested in. Also, obviously interested in the return on investment in terms of like program costs and vulnerabilities found, and what that means in relation to organizational costs such as OpEx and stuff like that. So there's a number of different factors that I use to communicate the value to our executive team, and I think they were really pleased with that.
Yeah. I think to follow that up, typically from our customers, the results are within the first week. So if you start a bug bounty program, you will get a large amount of research, or a large amount of submissions within the first week. It can go anywhere from 30 or 40, and you had already had previous bounty programs running. Typical number is around 150 within the first 2 weeks. And then if you extend that out to an entire year, because you'll typically, what happens, you'll get a lot of researcher engagement in the first few weeks. And then as those submissions are submitted to you for fixing, then that's when sort of the researchers who are making money off of the program will remain and continue to really sort of hunt for the much harder bugs to find. So you can go anywhere from like 500 bugs throughout the entire year. When I was a CSO, one of the things I did to communicate my value to other stakeholders, this was the other people in the executive team as well as the board of directors, was really the number of bugs found and the amount of money paid out. Because you can go to public programs over all of the different types of platforms and see number of bugs found and the number of dollars paid out, and it's a really good way to like compare. Like I was Okta, I could go and compare, the number of submissions and then how much we've paid out to Coinbase, to Uber, to Slack, and to all these other technology companies in the Valley. And so it's a very good value, because inevitably, as a CISO or a VP of security, they're going to be asked, how does your security program compare to other security programs? And this is a very good public way of being able to compare security programs. I think another question is asked is, and I can actually ask this one, to you, Johnathan, and answer it as well. Is like, if you were going to run an internal program, not necessarily a self-managed program, but we've had customers say, like, how do I open up the program to my internal users first, right? So they will actually want to have their internal team find their own bugs before they open it up to a set of researchers, and then before they want to open it up to a set of public, like a public program, really to be able. And so, like, that's a very good question, and the fact that you have to have a platform that allows internal employees to be able to sign up, and those internal employees to be able to engage. Have you ever tried to do that at any of the programs that you had, Johnathan?
I wouldn't say particularly in that context. I would say that we do have sub-environments where our AppSec teams and some of our engineers will take a look and try to take a look at security, maybe run some automated tools. We have some great tools in-house, right? Our AppSec team is fully equipped with a number of security, pen testing tools. Like I said, NetSparker, Acunetics, Burp Suite, Kali, Metasploit, all those. We also have Sneak, which is like a source code scanning tool that can run locally on developer laptops. It can also run inside your CI/CD deploy pipeline. kind of prevent criticals from being released out, being merged to master. So I would say we haven't particularly done it that way, but I love the idea, and I think it's a great way to get started, right? Because maybe you can catch 20 or 30% of these vulnerabilities prior to opening them up to a bug bounty, which then you have to pay out of pocket for. This is not a bad idea.
It's a question that actually points to there is a little bit of importance of when you have the desire to have your internal employees go and perform as part of the bug bounty program. What happens to the triage piece? Like, who is triaging what the internal people already know? That's an advantage of actually having an external managed program, such as what we provide Invision and other customers, is the fact that we can now have a team of triage personnel who are completely arbitrary and completely agnostic to what's being reported, right? And to your point, it provides a fair way of actually having internal employees who may know something about the code because they're developers and they built the code, but actually creating in leveraging an exploit and showing how to do that exploit and chaining those together is a much more difficult thing to do that many developers don't know how to do, but it's a good way for them to learn. And I like the idea of having developers get on the platform, and we have a mechanism where our customers' internal employees can be brought into programs, and actually they use it as a very good way for their internal developers to actually learn what's going on, because then they're trying to compete shoulder to shoulder with actual bug hunters, and it's a much different technique when you're a breaker than when you're a developer. And then we have time for one more question. I think this one. Do you want to do this one? How do you? So like, and I want to ask this one to you, Johnathan. How do you leverage the results, maybe the process of your bug bounty program to train your developers?
That is an excellent question, and let me tell you the approach we've taken here at Invision. On a monthly cadence, or basically a 6-week cadence, we will send out a security newsletter to all of engineering or all of our developers, and we will report to them the highest reported vulnerability within our code for the past month or the past six weeks. What we do is we primarily look at the bug bounty submissions. We also look at our internal findings, and from that we develop this newsletter. It's just a short, simple, and sweet 1 or 2 page thing that talks about the number of submissions we've seen over the past 6 weeks, what this exposure, what it means, what it does to us, the potential impact to the company, to the customer data. Obviously we get full context, we get full disclosure. We actually will put snippets of code. We don't call anybody out in particular, but we put snippets of code in there, and then we talk about how to correct it and like why we need to correct this and why we need to fix this going forward. So it's used in that manner. It also provides us an opportunity for our annual secure code training that we have to do, right? Some of you guys may or may not be advocates of the annual security awareness training. Best if I don't share my opinion on that right now, but let's just say for compliance purposes you have to do it once a year, right? If you're in PCI, it's also a great attestation for SOC, in HIPAA and things like that. So regardless, so we do it once a year, and it's a good time for us to sort of like accumulate over the past year, then take a look at those vulnerabilities, take a look at those submissions, and see, oh, we had 64 stored XSS or something, or we had directory traversal 35 times or something like that, and then we can touch on those things and pointedly work on a development or education program based on those.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Johnathan, and thank you everyone who joined this webinar. Anna will reach out to you here individually and make any of this information that we've talked about here available to you. Johnathan, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts and specifically demonstrating to us the value of your program and really the value of managed services for this.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining.
All right. Thanks everyone. Cheers.